At the reunion, my mom reached over and pulled the plate away from my son, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Food goes to real family first." I stood up, picked up my son, and we have not been back to a single family event since. My son was 7 years old and he had potato salad on his chin and he was completely, perfectly happy. That is the image I returned to. Not the one that came after. The before image. Declan with his paper plate piled away, only a 7-year-old piles a plate, everything touching everything, a small mountain of food assembled with pure enthusiasm and zero architectural consideration. He had gotten himself through the line without help, which was a new thing he was proud of, and he had carried his plate back to the table with the concentration of someone diffusing something, and he had sat down beside me and immediately gotten potato salad on his chin without eating any potato salad, which is a skill exclusive to children and which made me laugh, and he had grinned at me with all his teeth showing, and he was so completely, perfectly happy. Then my mother's hand crossed the table. It moved with a certainty that I can only describe as practiced, the way you reach for something you have always believed belongs to you. Her fingers closed around the edge of his plate. She pulled it across the tablecloth toward the center of the table, away from my son, and Declan's hands came up empty and confused, and he looked down at the space where his food had been, and then he looked up at my mother, and my mother looked directly into his 7-year-old face and told him that food goes to real family first. The table had 11 people at it. Every single one of them heard her. Not one of them said anything. Declan looked at me. I was already standing. I need to back up. Not far. Just far enough for you to understand the architecture of what my family had been building for 7 years before that afternoon, the slow and patient construction of a hierarchy that I had refused to see clearly because seeing it clearly would have required me to do something about it, and doing something about it would have cost me the version of my family I was still, at 36 years old, desperately trying to keep. Declan is adopted. I have never once, in his entire life, felt the need to put a qualifier on that sentence when I am talking about him to people who are not my family. He is my son. The paperwork is complete. The love is complete. The reality of him in my life, the specific weight of him when he falls asleep against my shoulder, the exact pitch of his laugh, the way he narrates his own Lego constructions like a sports commentator, is as complete and real and permanent as any biological fact has ever been. My mother has, from the beginning, categorized him differently. Not loudly. Not with the explicit cruelty that would have made it impossible to ignore or explain away. With the specific, quiet cruelty of language and omission. Your little one. Never his name, and the early years. The way she referred to my sister Cora's biological children as the grandchildren in Christmas card captions that listed every child except Declan. The birthday card she sent him for his 5th birthday with a $5 bill inside, while my nephew Fletcher received a check for $200 for the same milestone because, as she explained when I called her on it, Fletcher was her BL-odd. I called her on it exactly once. We had a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and ended with her in tears telling me she loved Declan in her own way and I was being aggressive, and I hung up having accomplished nothing except confirming that she was capable of crying on command when accountability arrived, and I filed the information away in the place where I kept things I was not yet ready to act on. I kept filing. For 7 years, I kept filing. My sister Cora filed alongside me, which is to say she witnessed everything and said nothing. Cora and I had been close, or I had believed we were close, in the way you believe things about people you have known your entire life without ever examining whether the closeness is real or simply the result of proximity and shared history. Cora was at the reunion. Cora was sitting 3 seats down from my mother when the plate was pulled away. Cora looked at her own hands when it happened. My brother-in-law Garrett looked at the middle distance. My Aunt Phyllis reached for the potato salad. 2 cousins I only see at these gatherings developed sudden intense interest in their phones. My Uncle Warren cleared his throat and asked someone at the other end of the table about their job. 11 people. Every one of them heard. Not one word. Declan's face, in the moment between the plate leaving and my standing up, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. He is a child who has navigated more complexity in his short life than most adults manage in decades. He came to me at age 2 from a situation I will not detail here because it is his story and not mine to lay out for strangers. He is the most adaptable, perceptive, emotionally intelligent person I have ever known, and that quality, that constant reading of rooms and people and safety levels, is not a gift. It is a survival skill. It is the thing that gets built in children who have learned, early, that the adults around them cannot always be counted on to be safe. He read the room in that moment the way he always reads rooms. His face went through something I can only describe as a closing. Not crying. Something more interior than crying, a door swinging shut behind the eyes of a child who has just had a suspicion confirmed. He had known, in the wordless, pre-language way that children know things, that something about him was different to these people. He had felt it in the specific warmth they directed at Fletcher and his little cousins, in the way hugs from his grandmother had always been half a second shorter than the hugs she gave the others, in the careful, observant way he watched my face at family gatherings to gauge whether we were safe. He had been asking a question for 7 years with his body and his behavior and his watchful, patient eyes. My mother answered it at that table. And I stood up. I picked him up. He is 7 and large for his age, and I am not a physically imposing person, but I picked him up with a specific adrenaline of a moment where the body does what the body does without consulting the planning part of the brain. He wrapped his legs around my waist immediately, the automatic response of a child who has learned that being picked up by me means we are moving to safety. I did not look at my mother. I want to be honest about that. I made the choice not to look at her because I knew that if I looked at her, I would say something in front of my son that I did not want him to hear, something that would take the temperature of that moment and raise it to a place that he would carry, and I had already decided, in the 3 seconds between standing and picking him up, that Declan was not going to carry anything else from my family that he did not choose to carry. I looked at Cora. I held Cora's eyes for exactly long enough for her to understand that I saw her. Not her mother. Her. That her choice to look at her hands was a choice, and I had registered it. She looked away first. I walked with Declan through the backyard of my Aunt Phyllis's house, past the folding tables with their red checkered cloths and their bowls of food going warm in the August heat, past the cousins playing on the lawn, past the cooler full of drinks and the lawn chairs with their occupants and the entire comfortable machinery of my family's gathering, and I put Declan in the car and buckled his seatbelt and walked around to the driver's side and got in. He asked me if we were leaving. I told him yes. He asked if it was because of Grandma. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands. I looked straight through the windshield at the street ahead. We're leaving because I decided we should. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in the voice he uses when he is being careful, she didn't want me to have the food. I turned to look at him. Fully, completely, no hedging. What she did was wrong. It had nothing to do with you. You did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? He looked at me for a long time with those watchful eyes. Then he nodded, once, the solemn nod of a child deciding to believe something because he needs to. I started the car. My phone began vibrating in the cup holder before we reached the end of the street. My mother called 4 times before we got home. Then Cora called twice. Then my Aunt Phyllis called once, which was notable because Phyllis and I had not spoken one-on-one in probably 3 years, the kind of relationship that exists only in the context of group events and requires those events to function. Then my mother called again. Then a cousin I will call Renee, who I genuinely like and who was one of the 11 people at that table, sent me a text that said, "Are you okay? That was awful. I'm so sorry." I saved Renee's text. I did not respond to anything else. Declan fell asleep in the car 20 minutes from home, the hard, sudden sleep of a child whose nervous system has been running on high and abruptly cut the power. I drove the rest of the way with him breathing slow and even in the back seat and the phone vibrating intermittently and the August light going gold through the windshield, and I felt, underneath the adrenaline that was still draining slowly out of my system, something that surprised me with its clarity. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. The specific lightness of a decision that has been postponed for 7 years finally making itself for you. My mother's first voicemail lasted 6 minutes. I know this because the notification told me the length before I deleted it without listening. 6 minutes is a long time. 6 minutes is enough time to build and demolish and reconstruct an entire argument. I can imagine its architecture without hearing it, the initial wounded register, the explanation that she had only meant that the food line hadn't been fully set up yet and there was a particular order to how Phyllis preferred things done, the pivot to my overreaction, the arrival at the suggestion that I was teaching Declan to see things that weren't there, the closing appeal to family unity and the question of whether I really wanted to do this. 6 minutes. I deleted it. Cora's first call I let go to voicemail. Her second I answered, because Cora calling twice in 10 minutes was unusual enough to register as something other than damage control. She was still in Phyllis's backyard. I could hear the party sounds behind her, the specific audio landscape of people continuing to have a good time, and something about that, the backdrop of ongoing celebration while she was calling me, told me most of what I needed to know about how the afternoon had been reframed in the 30 minutes since I had walked out. Cora's voice had the careful, ice-walking quality I had heard in other people's voices at other difficult moments. She told me she was sorry about what happened. She told me Mom hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She told me Mom was really upset that I had left without talking to her. I listened to all of it. Then, Cora. You were sitting 3 seats away. You watched it happen. Silence. You watched her take the plate out of his hands and you watched her look at him and tell him food goes to real family first, and you looked at your hands. So I need you to tell me what part of it you're apologizing for. The party sounds continued in the background. Someone laughed at something on the other side of the yard. Cora exhaled. It happened really fast, she told me. I didn't know what to say. Okay, I told her. I hung up. That was the last real conversation Cora and I had for 4 months. Not because I blocked her. Because she did not call again, and I did not call her, and neither of us reached across the silence to close it, and silence, left long enough without maintenance, becomes its own kind of answer. That night, after Declan was bathed and fed, after we had ordered his favorite pizza and watched 2 episodes of the nature documentary series he was working through, after I had tucked him in and sat on the edge of his bed longer than usual, listening to him talk about the episode until his words started slurring at the edges with sleep, after I had kissed his forehead and turned off his lamp and stood for a moment in the doorway of his room watching him in the dark, after all of that, I sat down at my kitchen table with my phone and I looked at my family's group chat. 27 unread messages. I did not read them. I looked at the notification number for a long time. Then I set my phone face down and I opened my laptop and I began drafting an email. Not to my mother. To myself. I do this sometimes, write things out in email format because the formality of it forces a clarity that journaling doesn't. I wrote down exactly what had happened, in sequence, without interpretation. The plate. His hands. Her words. The 11 people. Cora's hands. The walk to the car. His face. I wrote it all down. And then I wrote one more line, a line I had been composing for 7 years without knowing it. I am done protecting my child from the people who are supposed to love him. I saved it to drafts. I closed the laptop. I have never sent it to anyone. But I read it sometimes when I need to remember why we haven't been back. The reunion was in August. By September, my mother had cycled through wounded silence, a second round of calls I did not answer, a letter that arrived in the mail written in her familiar handwriting on stationery she had owned since I was a child, which I read once and placed in a drawer, and finally a pivot to reaching out to me through Cora as an intermediary. Cora relayed messages. I received them. I did not send responses back through the channel. By October, Declan had started soccer. He was not particularly fast and he was enthusiastic to a degree that frequently outpaced his coordination, and he was perfectly happy on that field in a way that made me understand, standing on the sideline in the October cold with a terrible cup of coffee, that the question of my family was not the central fact of his life. He had a coach named Marcus who yelled encouragement with such wholehearted commitment that it bordered on performance art. He had 2 friends on the team, a boy named Theo and a girl named Simone, who he talked about with the intensity that children reserve for their most important relationships. He had school and books and his nature documentaries and his Legos and me. He was building a life. Inside the gap my family had created, inside the space where their warmth had never fully arrived, he was building something real and sufficient and entirely his own. I watched him miss a goal by approximately 4 feet and throw his arms up in theatrical despair and then immediately start laughing at himself, and I thought about the plate being pulled across the table, and I thought about his face closing like a door, and I thought about the 11 people who said nothing. And then Marcus yelled something encouraging and Declan ran back into position and I drank my terrible coffee. The cliffhanger is not a dramatic confrontation. There was no confrontation. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people who expect one, who have been trained by every story about family conflict to expect the scene where the truth gets spoken at volume in a room full of witnesses and everything that was hidden comes fully into the light. What actually happened was quieter and more permanent than any confrontation. My mother stopped calling in November. Not gradually. Just stopped. The channel went silent in the way things go silent when the person on the other end has decided that the next move is yours and they are prepared to wait indefinitely. It was a specific silence, the silence of someone who believes that time and distance will eventually make you miss what you gave up enough to return on their terms. She was calculating. She was wrong. Declan asked about Grandma in December, not with distress, with the matter-of-fact curiosity of a child taking inventory of his world. He asked why she hadn't called for his birthday. I sat down on the floor of the living room, at his level, the way I always do when we are having a real conversation. I told him that Grandma and I were having some time apart. I told him that grown-up relationships were complicated sometimes. I told him that nothing about it was his fault. He considered this. Then, is it because of the food thing at the reunion? 7 years old. Watchful eyes. Nothing gets past him. It's connected to that, I told him. He nodded slowly. Processed it the way he processes things, with a patience that no child should have to develop but some do. Then he asked if we could have hot chocolate. I made him hot chocolate. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the mug, and he told me about something Theo had done at school that was extremely funny, and I listened, and I laughed, and I watched him in the warm light of our kitchen, and I understood that this specific ordinary moment, was what I had chosen over the reunion table. I would choose it every time. January arrived, and my mother sent a card. Not for any occasion. A blank card, the kind sold in drugstores in small packs for general use, and inside it she had written 6 sentences in her familiar handwriting that I will not reproduce here but can summarize as, she missed me, she missed Declan, she felt her intentions had been misunderstood, she hoped the new year would bring an opportunity for healing, she loved us both. She loved us both. I placed the card in the drawer with the letter. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. Then I called my therapist and scheduled an appointment for the following week, which was a thing I had started doing, responding to my mother's contact by immediately booking time with someone whose entire professional function was to help me remain clear-eyed about what was actually happening. My therapist is a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh. She does not tell me what to do. She asks questions that make me do the uncomfortable work of figuring out what I actually believe versus what I believe I am supposed to believe. In our session that week, she asked me what I wanted from my relationship with my mother. I sat with the question longer than I expected to. I want her to understand what she did. Dr. Marsh looked at me steadily. And if she can't? The question landed somewhere specific. I looked at my hands. Then I want Declan to never have to be in a room where he might find out she can't. Dr. Marsh wrote something down. She does that sometimes, writes things down when I say something she considers important enough to mark. I always want to know what she writes. I have never asked. February brought Cora back into my orbit, unexpectedly and sideways, through a text about something entirely unrelated to our family situation, a question about a recipe she remembered me making at some point, something with lemon and chicken that she was trying to approximate. It was such a specific, ordinary text that I answered it without overthinking it, sent her the recipe, and we exchanged 4 or 5 messages about cooking before the conversation reached its natural end. She texted once more after that, I think about what happened a lot. I looked at that sentence for a long time. It was not an apology. It was not a reckoning. It was something more ambiguous and more honest than either of those things, an admission of continued presence in the memory of that afternoon without any commitment about what she intended to do about it. I texted back, me too. And that was where we left it. Cora and I have a relationship now that I would describe as maintained, like a road that gets enough attention to remain passable without anyone investing in making it better. We text sometimes. We have spoken on the phone twice in the past year. She has not mentioned my mother directly since that backyard call in August. I have not asked. We are navigating the specific diplomatic arrangement of 2 people who love each other and have witnessed the same event and drawn different conclusions about what to do with it. It is not the relationship we had. It is the relationship that remains. Spring came and the soccer season started again, and Declan grew 1.5 inches and developed a passionate, consuming interest in deep-sea creatures that reorganized our entire streaming queue and resulted in 3 library books on anglerfish being checked out simultaneously and several detailed drawings of bioluminescent organisms appearing on the refrigerator. My mother texted in April. A photo. An old photo, one I had not seen in years, of me and Caleb at a family picnic, before Caleb moved across the country, before everything. In the photo I am laughing at something outside the frame. I look about 25. I look uncomplicated. Below the photo she had written, found this cleaning out a closet. Made me miss everyone. I stared at that text for a long time. It was expertly constructed. The photo doing the emotional work, the caption providing plausible innocence, the whole thing arriving without demand or explicit request, just a gentle detonation of memory and longing designed to do what she had calculated time and distance could not do on their own. I did not respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because I recognized the architecture of it, and recognition is not the same as immunity, and I knew that if I opened that door one inch she would walk through it entirely and we would be back at the table where Declan's plate had been before I understood what was happening at that table. I showed it to Dr. Marsh at our next session. She read it. She asked me how it made me feel. I told her it made me feel tired. She nodded like that was exactly the right answer. In June, my uncle Warren called. Warren had been one of the 11 people at the table. Warren had asked someone about their job while my son's plate was being relocated. Warren and I had a relationship of the surface kind, birthday texts and occasional holiday conversation, nothing that had ever required either of us to know the other well. He called because my mother had asked him to. He did not say this, but it was evident in every sentence structure, in the careful, prepared quality of his words, in the way he had clearly been given talking points and was working through them in order. He said he hoped I would consider coming to the summer gathering at Phyllis's. He said it would mean a lot to the family. He said sometimes these things escalate beyond what anyone intended, and the best thing is to come back together. Come back together. I listened to him complete his prepared remarks. Then, Warren? You were at the table in August. A pause. Yes. You heard what she said to him. Another pause, longer. Things happened quickly. That's what Cora told me. Silence. Warren is not a complicated man. He is a man who values comfort and ease and the maintenance of surfaces, which is not a moral failure so much as a choice, and the choice had consequences he was now being deployed to manage. I hear you, he told me, in the voice of someone who has been told that saying I hear you is disarming. Thank you for calling, Warren, I told him. He said he hoped I would think about it. I thanked him again and ended the call and stood in my kitchen for a moment in the specific aftermath of a conversation that had confirmed everything I needed confirmed about what my family understood to be at stake. They wanted the surface back. The gathering, the checkered tablecloths, the appearance of a family that was intact and uncomplicated. They were not, from any evidence I had received, invested in the thing that would actually make that possible, which was a genuine accounting of what had happened at that table and what it had meant about what my son was to them. They wanted me to come back so they could feel better. They were not offering anything that would make it better. Declan turned 8 in July. I threw him a party with Theo and Simone and 4 other kids from his class and Marcus, the soccer coach who had become, over the season, genuinely fond of Declan in the way some adults are simply drawn to specific children. We had it at a park and there was a cake with an anglerfish on it, which the bakery had executed with impressive commitment, and Declan screamed with delight when he saw it in a way that I felt in my chest like something expanding. My mother sent a gift in the mail. A wrapped box, age-appropriate, clearly selected with knowledge of his interests. A book about ocean creatures, a good one, the kind with photographs. Inside was a card with his name on it in her handwriting, a card that said happy birthday and that she loved him and that she hoped to see him soon. Declan opened the book with genuine pleasure. He has no context for the full architecture of what has happened. He knows Grandma and I are having time apart. He knows the food thing. He does not know the 7 years before it, the $5 birthday card, the grandchildren caption, the half-second hugs, the accumulation. He only knows what he has experienced directly, and what he has experienced directly is that one afternoon in August she told him he was not real family, and that since then I have not taken him back. He looked at the book. He looked at the card. He looked at me with his watchful eyes. Can I write her a thank you note? I told him yes. He wrote it himself, in his 8-year-old handwriting, 4 sentences, neat and careful, thanking her for the book and telling her about the anglerfish drawings on the refrigerator. He sealed it himself and asked me to mail it. I mailed it that afternoon. I did not include anything from me. What I want to tell you, what I have spent a year and a half learning how to say clearly, I'm not punishing my mother. I have examined this from every angle Dr. Marsh has offered me and from several I developed on my own, and I do not believe what I am doing is punishment. Punishment implies a sentence with an end date, a defined consequence with the implicit promise that compliance will eventually restore the previous condition. I am not offering that. I am not dangling reunion as a reward for correct behavior. What I am doing is simpler and more permanent than punishment. I am protecting my son from a specific and documented harm. I am honoring what I watched happen at that table, the closing of his face, the door swinging shut behind his eyes, and I am refusing to create conditions in which it can happen again. My mother does not have to be a monster for this to be true. She does not have to have intended the cruelty she delivered. She can be a woman of her generation with a specific and limited understanding of family that genuinely cannot expand to include a child who didn't arrive through the biological channels she recognizes as valid, and she can also be someone my son cannot safely be around until there is something more than a gift in the mail. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. I have stopped needing them to resolve into a simpler version of each other. The summer gathering came and went. Phyllis's backyard, the checkered tablecloths, the food going warm in the heat. I know this because Renee texted me a photo, not as pressure, just as the gesture of someone who wanted me to know she was thinking of me. In the photo there is a long table of family. There is a gap at one end, chairs that could hold 2 more people, one of whom would have been standing on one and reaching for the potato salad with both hands. I looked at the photo for a while. Then I sent Renee back a picture of Declan's anglerfish cake, with a note, we were celebrating our own way. She sent back 3 heart emojis. I saved the exchange in the same folder where I keep the important things. Here is what I know now that I did not know before that Tuesday in August. The table you choose to leave is not the table that defines you. The table you build after is. I have been building one, quietly and without announcement, in the 18 months since I picked up my son and walked through my aunt's backyard. It is smaller than the one I left. It seats fewer people. It is Declan and Dana and Petra and Renee and Marcus the soccer coach and Dr. Marsh and 2 or 3 other people who have proven, through repetition and consistency, that they understand what showing up actually means. It does not have everyone I loved at it. Some of those people chose the other table, and I have accepted that. Not with peace, exactly. With a specific, functional form of acceptance that is not the same as peace but allows you to move. My mother is still out there, still sending cards, still hoping for the version of this that ends with me coming back so the surface can be restored. She may be hoping for that for the rest of her life. I cannot control that. I can only control whether Declan sits at a table where someone decides his access to the food depends on whether they consider him real. He will not sit at that table again. Not while I am standing. He asked me last week, out of nowhere, while I was making dinner and he was doing homework at the kitchen table, whether Grandma was a bad person. The question arrived with no preamble. I turned from the stove. I looked at him. He was looking at me with his pencil held loose in his hand and his worksheet forgotten in the full attention of someone who has been thinking about a thing and finally decided to ask it. I turned the burner down. I sat across from him at the table. I thought for a moment about the honest answer versus the easy answer versus the answer that would serve him best, and I tried to find the place where all 3 overlapped. I think she loves in a way that has limits, I told him. And I think you deserve love that doesn't. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his pencil. Okay, he told me, and went back to his worksheet. 8 years old. Watchful eyes. Processing the architecture of the world with a patience that still takes my breath away. I went back to the stove. I turned the burner back up. I made dinner. Some people will never understand what they reached across that table and took. And the only answer to that, the only real and lasting answer, is to build a table they cannot reach. Set it for the people who know what real means. And never, under any circumstances, let anyone decide who is real enough to eat.